So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Mark. I'm the Executive Director for the Minnesota Soil Health Coalition. And just a heads up, we're recording this. The main reason is we want to record it for the important part. Could be some really good questions that we want to make sure people have in there. And then, of course, Jerry's talk. And we'll probably, shrink that down to, like I say, the really important part and end up sharing that on our YouTube or out through email to the folks who wanted to attend but couldn't. I'm not sure exactly what the plan is yet, but it's one of those better track it just in case. So that's why we're doing that. If anybody has issues with that or concerns, feel free to shoot me a message so we can talk about it and consider that. Really, because like I say, we're hosting these chats for you. This is for folks to get questions answered in response to questions we're getting about cover crops, and just to try to provide technical support for those who are interested. So take advantage of it. Ask us the questions. You can always sit in on one of these and decide you want to ask it offline. That's fine too. You could send me, Brandon, Tim, our speaker, Richard, anybody, email or give us a call. Happy to help where we can. And we'll be hosting these each month with a guest speaker from different parts of the state, and it'll be a different guest speaker each time. And the focus will be 100% cover crops and all the challenges, the good, the bad, and the ugly that come with that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brandon for a quick introduction, and we'll go through team introductions and then let Jerry kick it off.
Hey everyone, my name is Brandon Cotter. I do the marketing for the Soil Health Coalition. Started about 6 months ago. Moved to the cities from from Duluth. Was up there doing some sales and management and background in marketing. And yeah, it's nice to get out in the fields and do stuff. That switches it up, so I'm not just sitting behind a computer all the time. But thank you, and hope this first meeting goes well and you all enjoy it. Richard, if you want to go ahead.
Hi, I'm Richard Rohr. I'm with Minnesota Soil Health Coalition. I'm a conservation agronomist with them. Some of my background, I farm corn and soybeans. I've farmed for 17 years. I have worked in a couple different roles as an agronomist for local co-ops. I've also worked in crop consulting and equipment sales. So good to be here and glad to be a part of it.
All right, looks like I'm next. My name's Tim Radebach. I'm with the Minnesota Soil Health Coalition. I've been here about 2.5 years now. I do the coordinating of membership, cost share, and a variety of other different duties, what I'm tasked with. And like the interaction, like being out in the field, and grew up picking vegetables on a farm, but I am not a farmer. And Jerry, your turn is to take it over.
Okay, well, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me here. And of course, I'm Jerry Ackermann, and I live here in Jackson County. Actually, this is our home farm. We've worked a long time building this up. Previously, up till 2 years ago, we had 1/3 corn, 1/3 soybeans, and 1/3 alfalfa. You see them two long sheds on there, they were all full of alfalfa. And now I got an awfully lot of machine storage. We did go out of the alfalfa business 2 years ago. And now we've added oats along with it, small grains. And this year, for the first time, we're planting sunflowers, which is kind of a new adventure along the way. I basically threw a bunch of pictures together because I always say a picture's worth 1,000 words. And let's go on to the next one. We actually started cover crops back in 2005 or 6. And to be honest with you, the first 2 or 3 years were total failures. We didn't have anybody to talk to. I was reading magazines, everything else. And we just tried some things. Of course, everybody talked about annual rye. Well, we discovered after the second or third year, you can't plant annual rye after a harvest. You got to be planting that early in the year. This particular field here is one of my bean fields planted this spring on our home farm. You can see we drilled it, of course, and it's at an angle. And of course, you'll hear me talk an awful lot about winter rye. And to me, it's kind of my go-to cover crop. Not that I don't use many others and have tried many others, but I've found it's probably the best weed control and moisture control you can get. Not to say others don't work, but as we'll see through some of these slides, and you can walk out in my fields now where there's any cereal rye growing, it's the best water hemp control you can ever buy. Let's go on to the next one. This happens to be, I think, another field on the next picture. Okay, and these were seeded at 35 pounds. Aerially blown on before the crop was harvested. And of course, we're so doggone dry this past year. You didn't see any growth last fall. This is all come this spring now. And we'll be terminating that this week simply because the rye is getting to the point where it's going to start setting ahead. And it gets pretty hard to kill if it does set ahead. You sometimes got to spray it with Roundup twice or whatever. So we do combinations. Usually I will put on cereal rye, radish, turnips, and rape simply because turnips and rape are very small seed. You can add a pound and get a lot of seeds per acre just for that. And of course, we do sell seed. We're representative for lacrosse seed. And so we get to talk to a lot of other people, and a lot of people call us because of EQIP or CSP. And of course, if you're getting those, they do want multi-species if possible. And a lot of people tell me, well, why are we putting turnips and radishes and stuff out there in the fall when they don't get a lot of growth? Well, some years you will get the growth. And we'll see that in some pictures later on. And other years you won't. But if the government's giving you money, yeah, they want to see it in there, put it in there. I know years ago, probably around 2008 or 9, radishes were actually about $6.50 a pound, I think, at that time, and I was putting it in there. Actually, NRCS came to me right when CSP came out and signed me up, and so I was trying them, and I was getting pretty perturbed because I remember that fall, I went out there and I thought, why am I paying $6.50 for this pound of radishes, and the radish isn't even as big as my little finger, and here's 2 leaves on it, maybe 2 to 3 inches long. And it just happened. Dave Christopher lives just a couple miles from me, started cover crops about the same time I did. And he said, say, Steve Groff is speaking over at Albert Lee, Minnesota. And he said, I've talked to him on the phone. I'd like to go listen to him. You want to ride along? And I said, yeah, I'll go along. And of course, that was the year they had all the prevented plant from Rochester, Minnesota, clear over to Albert Lee and into northern Iowa. And the government came out at that time and said, hey, we will pay you to put a cover crop on there. Probably one of the first times the government had done that. And he was having a fit because so many of the people were out there and they went and chisel plowed or ripped it or anything. And he said, what a waste of money. Their tillage was done. They just burned up a lot of iron, a lot of diesel fuel. And then he had a radish there, probably 2 feet long and 4 or 5 inches in diameter. Yeah, it was a big radish, but he said, that's not what's doing the work. And then he showed a slide where they had dug away from a radish, and there was that radish in my field that looked just like the one I had, but the taproot was already 33 inches deep. And he said, that's what's doing you the work. And of course, I bit my tongue and said, yeah, I was going to quit planting radishes, and I'm still planting radishes to this day. So don't be alarmed if you don't see a lot in the fall. It's what's below ground that's really doing the work. So let's go on to another slide. Brandon, can we get another slide? Oh, well, we'll keep going.
Hey,
This
Jared,
is-
quick question is how many acres are you seeding cover crops?
We do 100% of everything.
Okay.
We got 1,100 acres, and every acre gets cover crop. Even after we take off our oats, we seed our oats with about 8 pounds of medium red clover, and then I'll add in radishes and turnips after the oats comes off on top of that yet, just to get that diversity. Now, this is one thing, this is actually strip-tilled manure, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Unfortunately, not very much cereal rye in this field. And it is, if I took that picture today, it's a lot greener, and of course, corn is coming up already. And now we just terminated that, of course. Let's go on to another slide. Now, I talked about controlling moisture. This was last year. We were really, really wet around here. And that's one thing I discovered is cereal rye sucks a lot of moisture. And we'll see that on a slide later on also. So I just leave it grow. This is no-tilling corn right here. And this is no-tilling soybean, excuse me. But the first time you do that, when that's up that tall and it's up about top of your radiator, it's like, is this really going to work? But it certainly does. But likewise, the other thing can happen. If you've got a dry spring, cereal rye and your cover crops will suck a lot of moisture. And I know I've been the eternal optimist a couple of years, and I had an agronomist tell me, you got to go out and kill it. It's affecting your soybean. So it's the old rule of thumb. If it's dry, kill it early. If it's wet, don't worry about it. Let it grow a while. So let's go on to another slide. This was kind of interesting. I did that early this spring, and everybody talks about strip tilling, which strip tilling is great. I strip tilled for over 25 years. Then we got a different planter, and my wife said, you're going to go no-till. And of course, I argued with her. I thought, we've been doing strip tilling. It's working great. Why do it? She said, you're hiring it done. It costs 25 bucks an acre. Now they're going up a little more even. That's some money you don't have to spend. And finally, I threw up my arms, and we're no-tilling the last 3 years now. But this happened to be strip till here. So I went and put the thermometer in the strip. Now we'll go to the next slide. Notice what temperature is. I was surprised. This is no strip. There's cover crop growing. There's only about 1 degree difference. And I always hear, that black dirt that strip is always warmer. But I know I talked to Dr. Shannon Brown out of ARS out of Brookings, South Dakota. And she was the one that told me when you've got that cover crop growing, those plants warmed by the sun, they send that heat below the soil. So sometimes, yes, there's maybe a psychological thing that it has to be black dirt. But if you got a cover crop growing, it's warming your ground. So let's go on to another slide. Now, this would have actually been 2021. First year I got the new planter with the downforce and everything. And Nancy told me I was no-tilling. And I'll tell you what, the first time after you're used to strip tilling and planting in the strips and you go out there, it's a little scary. It's a funny feeling. It's like, is this really going to work? But again, I've got my cover crop growing, cereal rye that was seeded into corn, probably about 35 or 40 pounds. This year we got a little bit more. That year we had a little bit more growth. But the one thing you'll notice in these slides, you do not see one weed growing hardly. I take that back. Dandelions will not, they'll still keep growing. Cereal rye doesn't seem to bother them too much, but you won't see any water hemp or giant ragweed or anything growing if you got cereal rye growing there. Okay, let's go on to another slide. Now, this is an old slide. This was actually before when the crop insurance said we had to kill our cover crop. I believe it was 10 days to 2 weeks before planting. And that particular year, I don't know what year this is, probably, I don't know, 2016, 17. Still my old planter yet. But we had a nice stand. We killed it. We got the strips are clean. We didn't have to worry about getting in there with a herbicide. There was nothing else growing. It's just works, period. So let's go on to another slide. Again, this happened to be 2018, I believe it was. That's actually a strip-tilled field. But it was so wet that spring, we actually just left the cereal rye grow. One, he couldn't get in there to kill it because it was too wet probably. But we got every acre planted, both 2018 and 19 when it was that wet, simply because of that cover crop growing there. Now, it's a good thing I had guidance on a tractor because there's no way in heck you could find those strips to, for your first pass. But it does work. And again, weed control is fantastic. Now, on the flip side of this, cereal rye sucks up an awful lot of nitrogen. When you let it grow this tall, it takes a long time for that to release that nitrogen. University of Minnesota had told me years ago already, if you want quick release of that nitrogen that plant sucks up, you want to kill it within 8 to 10 inches, and then it's starting to release within 30 days. So, but the taller it grows, the more nitrogen it's holding back too. So you have to keep that in mind. A lot of people I hear talk about allelopathic effect on corn. And I know I sat in on a seminar by Hans Cook and Dan Towery. They have a consulting business down by Purdue, and they do a lot of work with Purdue. And they said they had 7 years of tests. It's not an allelopathic effect on corn. It's just there's no nitrogen available. If you're planting into a good stand of cereal rye, you better have some starter fertilizer or get some nitrogen in that corn very quickly because there's none available. So that's something to keep in mind also. So let's go on to another slide. Okay, this is actually an old slide, and this particular field, actually, it was two fields, the one you're seeing in the picture and the one off to the left. One was soybeans and one was corn. And our watershed came to me and said, would you take a field of corn and a field of beans and do half cover crops and half what you normally do? And I said, oh yeah. And they said, we'll pay for it. And I said, well, great. I'll gladly do that. I'm still learning myself. And of course, we got the seed, or was getting the seed, and the company I was getting it from at that time told me, don't even spread it. You're wasting your money. It's too dry. Because we were in a drought in 2012 and it hurt our yields and everything. And so I told the watershed what the company had told me, and she said, no, the lady at the watershed, this is a grant and they want to know the results, good or bad. So we flew it on and harvested, and they had a field day that fall, and there was really nothing to see because there was no moisture. In the soybean stubble where the combine had pushed some of the seed into the ground, you might have seen 1 or 2 an inch tall, but that was about it. Well, then here come the spring of 2013, and we're the exact opposite. We're drowning. And I mean, this field was the last field I planted in corn, and I mudded it in because it was on a Saturday and the forecast was 100% rain. And I mean, I don't know how many times I stopped and unplugged gauge wheels. And of course, the corn grew. I think actually I was in CSP at that time because it just come out, and I called the NRCS and I said, look, I was supposed to kill this. I couldn't get in there. I want them to spray it. And they laugh at me like there's no way in heck. And it rained, about 30 days after I planted that. And of course, here it came up. That seed, that what didn't grow the fall before, a lot of it grew. It was very poor stand, but it was there and I couldn't kill it. Well, then come harvest, and this is an actual yield map from that fall. And I remember I took the end rows off. Nancy normally runs our combine. She calibrates it. So if you ever want a good calibration, you get a woman because they're really picky. And so I took the end rows off. She had to take her mother to a doctor's appointment or something there, and got the field opened up. And the first thing I noticed was, you'll notice that lower half where there's no cover crop. I had all kinds of nightshade, water hemp. I don't know. I had every weed out there was because we were just using Roundup for corn. And so I was combining away. And when I got up there to where we had the cover crop, there wasn't a weed there. And one of the guys driving semis brought semi back, and it's a short field. So I could make, I don't know, 2 rounds before I dumped or something. And jumped in the combine, and I was telling him, look at over here. We got weeds. Over here, it's clean. We're going to be using these cover crops for a herbicide. And I wasn't paying too much attention, and we got into where it was clean. And he said, well, I don't know about that, but your yield monitor just went from 195 bushel an acre to about 225. And he was right. I mean, it just totally blew me away what was going on. And so by the time I got done with the field, the light bulb went on. The only difference was that cover crop. But I remember walking that field earlier, and the half that didn't have the cover crop was a little yellow. It was lacking nitrogen probably, and what else. But where the cover crop was, it was a deeper green. So what happened is that cereal rye kept sucking up a lot of moisture. We couldn't get in there to kill it. And it got that corn, that half of the field, growing better than the half without the cover crop. So there's ways we're not only using it as a herbicide, but we're using it to control moisture. So let's go on to a different slide. And once in a while, you just got to get lucky. This particular field was supposed to have been corn on corn because it had been alfalfa the year before. Well, that was, I believe, 2018 or 19. And of course, we had so much loss of alfalfa that year, we had to put in some more. And Jeff Calder, University of Minnesota, has told me I was always crazy after alfalfa. You got enough nitrogen there, you should go corn on corn. Well, I was going to do that this year, but then crop insurance said, wait a minute, you haven't planted that much corn before. You can plant it, but we're not going to cover it. Well, okay, we'll go to beans then. So in the meantime, alfalfa cutting was getting underway, and I and Nancy are driving around, and crops are coming up, and we come by this field, and Nancy said, I don't think that cereal rye is dying. I said, well, it's a little lighter colored. Well, yeah, it was starting to get mature, and you could see the beans growing nice and green down in there. When we got home, she checked spray tickets, and she said that field never got sprayed. So I called the co-op and say, how come that didn't get sprayed? And I could hear the paper shuffling on the file. Well, it says here, don't spray that field. Oh yeah, that's right. We were going to go corn. on corn. I told you not to spray it because we're going to plant the beans. I said, well, why didn't you spray it? I don't have a map for beans on that field. Well, I told him get out and spray it, and he did, and it took forever to die. I think this was probably in August. I'm not for sure, maybe late July. But I know the university had called me and said, say we got a delegation from Hungary coming, and they want to learn about cover crops. They want to learn about strip till and no till. And, but there's only one of them that can speak English. And I said, well, that's fine. I'll do one better than that. I got several neighbors that are doing this. I'll invite them over and, they can ask questions. Well, they came down with 2 van loads, and of course we got on the yard. Well, we did discover they all could speak a little English. It may take you 3 minutes for a 30-second conversation, but you could always have a conversation. And we had a neighbor bring a strip till machine. We had a high clearance applicator here, so they were pretty excited. And I said, well, rather than just talk here in the yard, let's go around to some fields. And we got to this field, and of course, I told them what had happened. We didn't get it sprayed right away. And it was dead. It was still standing there, and it was gradually falling down. But they were digging up my soybeans, and my agronomist was there, and a co-op rep was there, and some of the neighbors, and they were just amazed at the nodulation on them beans. And I said, well, David Brandt always told me, leave that cereal rye grow. You want to starve them beans so they nodulate more. And they couldn't hardly believe it. And actually, that was probably one of our best fields that year as far as yield and harvest went. So we can go on to another slide here. So sometimes you may screw up, you can get lucky out of that. Now, I do a lot of interseeding. I feel it's kind of a herbicide. I have had a little trouble the last couple of years. I think we've got that figured out because when we were doing our best results were is when the government said we had to kill that 2 weeks before we plant it. Well, now what are we doing? We're planting green. And remember, I said cereal rye affects what's growing. I think we're probably killing the cereal rye and trying to come in and interseed too quick. So this year we're making some adjustments, trying that out. This happens to be Bruce Brunk. This was the first field. He got a new Henniker applicator, 12-row machine, and he came to my field. This is one of our farms, and it works quite well. But again, we had a cover crop there. We killed it, and what have we got? We don't have any weeds. So let's go on to another slide. This is the results of that field. Now, when Bruce got there, he pulled in the gate. We had him filled up and everything, and he took off and went about 20 yards, and he stopped. And I thought, well, what's going on? So I walked up there, and it says, well, my center 4 rows aren't working. And I said, oh, okay. Well, here Henniker has electric drives, and we discovered there's 3 drives on that, left, center, and right. And somebody at the factory forgot to plug in the electric motor. Well, we plugged it in. He said, should I back up? And I said, well, it's only 20 yard, 4 rows. Let's leave it for a test plot, see what happens. And he actually called me because he had to go for parts or something. He was near the field, and he said, say, did you check out your test plot? And I had almost forgot about it. And I said, no. Well, he said, you better get your camera and go down there and check it out. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, this proof was perfectly clean when we seeded this. This was the 4 rows that did not get the cover crop. It was solid water hemp printed up to my belt buckle. That was an eye opener. So you can use these covers in many different ways. And one of them I'm finding is actually they're kind of a herbicide. If you got something green and growing there, you don't have the weeds germinating. If you don't have something growing, Mother Nature's trying to cover that ground. So let's go on to another slide. This is not actually my field. This is a father and son who have livestock. And you'll notice they had electric drives, so they experimented and they skipped 1 row, planted 2 rows, skipped 1 row, planted 2 rows because they've got a lot of stock cows. And I said, well, what was the yield difference? And he said, well, it was hard to tell, because it was a different field. But he said, I would say we were about 6 to 8 bushels below our normal yield by doing the skip row. But he said that field fed our whole herd all winter long. And he's absolutely right. So he maybe sacrificed 6, 8 bushels on yield, but he saved it on feed because it fed his whole herd all winter off of that field. And for the guys in livestock, I would seriously look at that. Actually, I've advertised my fields trying to tell people, why don't you put up a hot wire and bring your cattle over? But nobody wants to build fence anymore. So, but it still makes a big difference for weed control and for soil health too. Let's try another slide. Okay, planters actually, I think it was a year ago. I don't remember, Mark. I think maybe it was 2 years ago. I actually did 4 seminars on planters and strip till machines. This happens to be my planter. It's a 1790, 1631. We've got the row cleaners. They're the adjustable ones. I know I had back surgery in 2019. Bought this planter, didn't have row cleaners on it. First year I went without row cleaners and I was not happy. My agronomist got me in his pickup. We drove out there. He said, okay, you got corn plants that are shorter here and some that are taller. So that's why I'm not happy. Well, he said, look at these plants that are shorter. There's trash around them. He said, corn does not like that. He said, get some row cleaners on there. So the next year we put on the row cleaners. I did put on drag chains because I learned years ago, we actually were some of the first people that no-tilled corn into alfalfa. And we discovered we could kill the alfalfa in the fall, come in there with down pressure. My neighbor bought a new John Deere planter with down pressure. And I think we put maybe 5 gallons of 1034 over in the furrow, and that's all we did for fertilizer. And we'd get 200 plus bushel corn every time. So we'd actually probably were strip tilling 20 years ago, but it just not on everything. And we'd always went strip tilling the corn and no-till beans for the last 25 years. This works good. I have one notched closing wheel. You notice I got the spade wheel or the spoked wheels on my corn rows. Doesn't seem to need it on the bean rows if we're going to have wet conditions. And to be honest, when I went 100% no-till, I don't have trouble with any plugging up on my gauge wheels anymore. It just opens it up, closes up the slot, works great. Um, let's go on to another slide. Oh, this is one thing I did put on the scalloped disc openers. I think they're excellent. I'm trying to say his name out of Indiana. He spoke in Minnesota here different times. He spoke highly of them, so I did put them on. That's with 3 years wear on. We did change them this year now. And we just actually changed the corn rows this year. I think I can get another year, maybe 2 out of the bean rows because they only do half of the acres. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, of course, John Deere, they have, where you got to have slide the card in there so you make sure they're touching 2 inches. One of these is like the International, it's offset. So one is slightly larger than the other, and the lead edge does all the cutting, or does the majority of the cutting, I should say. I've had excellent luck with them. So we can try another slide. This I threw in here. This happened to be a neighbor has this. It's a Henniker strip till machine. People are always worried, and I've never owned a strip till machine. I've hired it done all the years I've done it. I keep a list of people with strip till machines, and I think I have 20-some machines within a 30-mile radius. So if somebody wants to try it, I can usually tell them a neighbor or something, talk to them. They'll probably do a field for you. This is spring strip till. And a lot of people are scared of it, but I have done it several times simply because the guys I'm hiring didn't maybe get done or had too many acres and they come do it in the spring. This particular 80 did not get done. And I called my neighbor, Dale Hessman, and I said, Dale, could you do that? Yeah, he said, I'll gladly do it. I got a little of my own to finish up. Word of caution here. We strip tilled this field and it was kind of early. So I thought, oh, yeah, no weeds out there. Good cover starting to come. And then I sprayed it with Roundup after that. uh, we had to spray it twice because what happened is a strip till machine threw some of the root balls over. And of course, when you sprayed it, it didn't get much on the cereal rye. Them root balls came to life and we had to spray it twice to get rid of all the cereal rye. So, usually I tell people when you want to know what not to do, talk to me because I've made all the mistakes already and learned the hard way, but it may help somebody else. And that's kind of why the coalition got started. I mean, when I started, I called these universities, I called IAMS, I called Minnesota about doing them. They all told me it wouldn't work. We're too far north. And then Gabe Brown, I talked to him. I called him up because he was in a magazine and he's up in North Dakota. And I thought, well, he's further north than I am. If he can make it work, sure ought to be able to figure it out. And that's eventually how the coalition got started. Some people started talking to other people, trying it, and we formed a coalition so we could talk to the guys that were trying it, learn from each other. And it's worked very, very well. I think we have 1,000 mentors now, and we got over 1,000 members. So kind of grieves me a little bit when I see the corn growers, oh, we're going to get a mentor network, and the university, oh, we're going to get a mentor network. Well, duh, we did that a long time ago. So let's go on to another slide. And for you guys who got hog barns, this I would highly recommend. There's several on the market. This happens to be a company called VTI out of Iowa. They are strip tilling the manure around here. The majority of them are, I should say, and some of what I get is strip tilled with this machine. They're strip tilling it and planting directly on the strip. It's working quite well. We get the analysis, you know, for what the manure was in and everything. But I actually was invited down to Omaha several years ago, and they had all big regenerative practices, strip till, no till, cover crops, you name it. One of the seminars, and they had so many seminars, you couldn't attend them all. So I and Nancy split up, and the one seminar was on hog manure and cover crops. And I thought, Jackson, Martin, Nobles County, they're the hog capital of Minnesota. I mean, I can look out my window any direction and find a confinement barn. So I went to it, and surprisingly, the first thing out of their mouths was, if you're not planting a cover crop, we guarantee you're losing 40 to 60 units of nitrogen and probably higher, because you're putting this manure on the fall, you get some rains, and of course it starts going down through the soil profile, and then you get freeze up. And of course, here comes spring, and of course it going down through the soil profile a little more. You maybe get 2, 3 rains before you plant, and then you plant your corn. Well, what happens, yes, you're still getting rains and the corn roots are going down, but each time it rains, it goes a little deeper, and eventually the corn roots never catch up to all that nitrogen. It gets too low in the profile. By using cereal rye, which is one of the best scavengers of nitrogen, that sucks all of that nitrogen up from that manure, holds it near the surface in that plant root and in the plant itself. Now, when you terminate it, then of course it releases back a corn crop. And Randy Wertzman from Rushmore, Minnesota, actually, I took pictures of his machine. He was one of the very first ones to strip till manure. And I had to present it at the National Strip Till Conference. And he said right off the bat, it's worth 20 bushel an acre. And I said, well, how do you know that? Well, he said, I'm like you. NRCS came out to talk to me. So I did half of the field. And he said, I've got 7 barns. So he said, I grow mostly corn, maybe once in a while a few beans. So a lot of it's corn on corn. And he said last year, well, this was probably his second or third year he'd done covers, but he said the first year they had done this, and he said when we were combining and they hit where the cereal rye had been, the yield monitor jumped 20 bushel an acre. And he said the only thing I can attribute it to is the cover crop. Well, I'll believe that because Michigan State said the same thing. And so now pretty much everybody that I talk to that's doing this are using a cover crop, and it's working very well for them. Okay, let's go on to another slide. Okay, we're getting down to the end of our slides, which is good because we're over halfway through our seminar here. This is Nancy combining one of her fields. This particular farm, the Little Sioux River just starts north of it about 2 miles. So it's not a big river there. We can jump across it in places, but it is subject to flooding. So I've got 30 acres of permanent grass down there on either side of the, I call it the creek at that point. It's not a river yet. But this particular year was 2019 when I had back surgery in September. So I was not doing much of anything. All the truck drivers and Nancy's running a combine, and I pretty much sat in the pickup and watched things happen. This particular field, when she got done, she come up and she said, say, I left some down there by the grass. And I says, why? Oh, it's really wet down there, she said. And I said, well, God, did you try it? Well, she said, I got as close as I felt safe. And I said, well, why don't you go try it again? We don't want to put the header on the trailer, move all the semis, move all the grain cart, and have to come back here for an acre. I said, I'll go down and try it. And it took me a while to get up in the combine. And of course, here comes Nancy up the ladder. And I said, what are you doing? Well, I'm going to ride along. And I said, well, if you're going to ride along, you could have just well tried it. She said, no way. You get this baby stuck. It's your fault, not mine. Because I'd never hear the end of it. And we went down there with an empty grain tank. And I made the first pass along there. And she said, there's actually water standing over there. Well, the water was maybe half, 3/4 inch deep. And it was a little scary. Combine was kind of rocking from side to side, and I'm looking over at the wheels, and the wheels are wet. And she said, "You're going to try and combine this?" I said, "Well, yield monitor says 13.2. It's ready to go." So I made the first pass and I kind of looked at my tracks and there was really no mud. It sunk in about 5, 6 inches. So I got the second pass, and after I got the second pass, I looked back in the grain tank. Ooh, the window's covered. I'm getting over half full in this grain tank already. And then I thought, well, do I go to the other end and dump for the last pass right up against the grass? I thought, ah, heck, we'll try it again. And we made it through and made it up there to the up by the road and dumped on the green cart, of course. And I put the header on a trailer. And in the meantime, Nancy's telling everybody standing around her, "This fool just combined through standing water." And they were talking about it. And I said, well, yeah, it works. I mean, you put that cereal rye and that root system in there, or any cover crop for that matter, it's like putting rebar in your soil. And you can look at our end rows through the summer, and our end rows are straight across on the corn. I can look at neighbors, and they'll start out pretty tall by the road, and then they get shorter for a ways, and then pretty soon, all of a sudden, they get bigger. That's compaction. I've got one neighbor who actually, when he gets done, he'll put his cereal rye on before harvest, simply because he's seen that happen here to him too, where he could combine and guys couldn't. And I said, "Why are you out there again redoing the end rows?" Well, he said, "We had it growing there, but you got all these semis and grain carts smashing it flat to the ground. Maybe it'll kill some of it." He said, "I want to make darn sure I got a cover growing in them end rows where all that compaction is." So I've started doing the same thing. Where we know the trucks and the grain carts are, we come back and give it an extra shot of extra cover crops to make sure we get that compaction out of there. And it seems to work. So, all right, let's go on one more. This will be my last slide. This is actually done probably about 2012, 13. Ray Archuleta was coming out to our farm. It was after we'd been down to Omaha and we started experimenting with interseeding into corn. And it kind of surprised me because I said, well, rather than a 10-foot long plot, I want this to go clear across, half mile on the foot. And he agreed with me. So we did our strip till corn and we did our normal fertilizer and everything. And he came up with a concoction and we did 12 rows. At that time, we were 12 row equipment. We did 12 rows with a cover crop and our normal side dress. And then we did 12 rows with a cover crop, no side dress of nitrogen, and then another 12 rows with cover crop and our normal practices. It really surprised me. We did, when we did with the yield monitor, the 12 rows without the cover, with the cover crop and no extra nitrogen side dress other than what we had on a starter. I think it went 198 normally. It was only like 187 where we didn't do the side dress because he kept telling me, "You got more nitrogen than what you need out here." Made me kind of open up a little bit. And since then, we've done studies. Actually, we did a study with 8 other farmers one year where they started, they side dressed at 80 pounds up to all the way up. I think it was 20-pound increments all the way up to 220 pounds. And yes, when you got up there, you got more yield, but the break even was between 140 and 145 pounds that you got the most bang for your buck. And to this day now, we did 140 pounds of nitrogen. That's all we do, period. That's all it's going to get. Now, yes, maybe we could get a few more bushels yield, but for the extra cost of the nitrogen and yield we got, does not pay. But the one thing that happened, this was the third year, this was on our home farm that we'd had a cover crop, and it was in corn. And Ray wanted a soil pit. And I said, "Ray, it's November 10th when you're coming. It's cold out here." "Oh, I don't care. We'll do it anyway." So neighbor had a backhoe. I had him do a soil pit. It really opened my eyes just after 3 years. And of course, it had had alfalfa, I don't know, a few years before it on that field. But he actually climbed down that pit and he was pointing out how we had roots down there at 8 feet. I could not hardly believe it. But he said, also showed the worm channels. And he said, these roots will follow them down. Well, NRCS called me in the spring and they said, "Say, we want to do a soil test." And that's right when the Haney test was starting to get hot. And I said, "What's it cost me?" "Nothing, we'll pay for it." And I said, "Well, I don't care, you can come out." And I know they came out with a probe and the helper he had, he was an understudy there, he's dumped it in. He said, "Whoa." And I said, "What do you mean, whoa?" "Well, there's nothing there." He said, "I can poke it right in." "Oh, okay." And he said, "I was out here for that field day this was 200 bushel of corn. Where the heck is all the trash? I says, I don't know. Archuleta said the beans, well, worms ate it probably. Maybe it blew away. I don't know. You know, he said, no, that you go in any other field, there's all kinds of residue. You don't have much residue compared to everybody else. So I said, oh, wait a minute. So I went and grabbed a spade and I pulled it up because when I picked him up at the airport, I said, you know, I'm doing some of this stuff and I'm doing cover crops, I'm doing strip till, no till. How the heck do I know if I'm making any difference? And he said, well, you go over to the fence line where the grass is growing. And he said, you take a spade full of dirt, pull it up. Should look like chocolate cake or cottage cheese, all crumbly.
I'm gonna bulk up. Thank you. I'm gonna get all bulked up.
So, well, it ended up when I pulled that up, I pulled that picture and I've sent it to Ray Archuleta. I said, well, I think we're doing something right. So with that, we can take any questions, you know, anything else anybody wants to talk about.
Jerry, thanks for your presentation.
Well, and one thing, Mark's got a picture of that interseeding there on his thing. That's what I want to see when I combine corn. When Nancy comes in, she pulls it up, every snout's got green hanging on there. And I will clue you in, but if you throw in a few turnips, and if you're a deer hunter, they go crazy. Guys that drive my semis every year, can we hunt your ground again? Every year they get their tags filled. So just a side note on that.
So yeah, like Jerry said, at this time, we'd like to open it up for questions if there are any. That's really how we do the best job learning is by having real questions from the audience. So if you got anything, we'd like to hear it.
Hey, Jerry, this is Pete. I had a question about the spring strip till you were talking about. Do you think that once you've been in no-till or strip till and cover crops for a few years, that opens up that operation to a lot more because you've got the soil structure built and it doesn't come out in big chunks? I think that's kind of been my experience. Early on, I tried some spring strips and ended up with some shank slots, um, and a lot of chunks at the surface. So I had a kind of a spotty stand, but I've tried it several times, 15, 20 years later, and it seems it doesn't matter. It's a really nice strip. What's your opinion?
I'd probably have to agree with you, Pete, because by that time, when I was doing spring strip till, I was already using covers. And one thing I've noticed out of all the machines around here, and actually I talked to Soil Warrior at a meeting here not too long ago, about 85% of their machines now are all coulter machines. And they're kind of going away from the shank. And actually, one of the young guys that's got a strip till machine around here, they'll use the shank in the fall, but in the spring they take it off and they just blend it through his whole soil profile. I don't know. I probably the shank could give you a little more clods without the cover crop, I would say. But again, if you're in there early, you probably get a shower or two and it settles down or whatever. The big thing I'm seeing now is guys are buying what they call strip fresheners, which is no more than a rotary hoe just over the row. And I scratched my head because way back in 2018, when I had some spots that were real shiny black in them strips, and I thought, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to have trouble with my gauge wheels. So a relative of mine I knew had a rotary hoe yet, and I asked him if I could rent it. And so we just run through it with that rotary hoe, and a lot of times 3-4 hours later, we'd plant that area. Now, was it ideal? Probably not. But it's kind of like Larry the Cable Guy. You got to get her done, whether it's good or bad or what. And I know when them people from Hungary were here, they wanted to look at my equipment, which it was extremely wet. And we walked over by the planter, and here was some mud hanging on it. And I kind of kicked it, and they dropped it off and said, "Whoa!" And I said, "Yeah, it was not ideal, but we got the crop in. It was time; it had to go in." And as weather turned out, it actually turned out to be a pretty good crop. So yeah, I would say, the cover crop's definitely going to make a difference for your strip tilling. And I know that's people complain about if they get equip or something, they got to do it 3 years on the same field. Well, there's a reason for that. I mean, you can actually see a little change the first year. The second year, you'll see more, but by the third year, yes, you really start seeing some changes in your soil. The first one being, as everybody talks about after 3 years, hell, where I always had a pond there when I got an inch and a half of rain, there's no water standing. It all goes in. So them are some of the things you find out along the way that, kind of they explain themselves to you, but if you're not looking for them, you don't realize it at first. And I would say, yes, I am no-tilling now for 3-4 years. A little scary at first, and I'm still learning on that yet. I still like my strips, and I actually did one farm with strips this year simply because I had doggone many foxholes and coyote holes and everything else. I thought maybe to level it out a little bit when I planted it. But I know Ray Archuleta told me, he said strip till actually is a step between conventional tillage and no tillage. You're still doing some tillage, but it's in a very narrow area. And I know people have told me that have started strip tilling after 2-3 years. They can tell their ground's changing even without cover crops. You add in the cover crops, it just makes it easier. So that's my thoughts on it anyway.
That's kind of my thoughts also. I kind of wanted to bring that up in case there's some beginners or people who are thinking about getting into this, that spring strips, if you've got a shank machine, can be a disaster some years if the weather doesn't cooperate and you get a really chunky seed bed. But once you're in it for a while, then you can just do about anything you want.
Yeah, I will say, even with strips, if you got a wet spring, you can still have trouble in the low ground, because that's black dirt. It sticks.
Yeah.
Actually, the no-till works almost the best when it's wet, when you got a cover crop, because it just slices through there, opens it up, and closes the seed trench, and you're in business right there. So, because you're strip tilling, correct, Pete?
Sorry about that. I was on mute and then I dropped my phone trying to get it back on. But yeah, I'm strip tilling on corn on most acres. Anything that had small grains on, and I get a big tall cover crop in the fall on that. I'm basically just no-tilling that in the spring.
Oh,
And I don't know if I'll ever get away from it, Jerry, just because I think I'll always have, I like the banded dry fertilizer for cost and putting on materials. So my next strip till machine will probably be something like Tiffany has by Redwood Falls, where it's just basically opening a slot to put the fertilizer in and zipping it back closed and go from there.
actually, I had a young gentleman here about 3-4 weeks ago, just before corn planting, and they had bought a used soil warrior, and I had never heard of this before. It basically has one coulter, and they're shooting the fertilizer down behind this lead coulter, and then just two coulters making a moon. And he said, boy, it doesn't take about 10-15 horse to pull it, per row. And he said, it's working great. And he showed me some of his strips, and I thought, maybe we're overthinking this too much. We got to have a lead coulter, we got to have two mixing it with a shank, and then we got to have two more finishing it off, and maybe a rolling basket. Maybe we don't need that much. I was looking at his strips, and he started using it. This is his second or third year. The first year they got it, they only did a few acres. They didn't know really what they were doing, he said. In the second year they did more. Now this year they did all their acres strip tilled. And I know Dave Christopher, he was one of the first guys to have a strip till machine around this area. I think it's the oldest one in Jackson County. I think it's 26 years old. And it's still going strong. But he did too. They eliminated some of it off of there. They still do use a shank, but then not near as many coulters as what they originally had on it. And but he was the first one. We actually did a test plot for the University of Minnesota, I don't know, 8-9 years ago. And of course, we laid it out. We had teff grass around it, and we had interseeding. We had different demonstrations. I actually demonstrated a strip till machine that day. And of course, the university was charging people for it. And I thought, are you nuts? These farmers ain't going to pay to come see this. Be danged if they didn't have 128 people there. But it was well worth it because they got to see different covers growing, the interseeding, and but they wanted 30-inch rows. And I said, well, I don't have bean plates for my planter. My drill's either 7.5 or 15 inches. No, no, we want 30 inches. We got other plots around the state. We want all this information the same. We'll hire somebody, or do you know a neighbor? So I called Dave and I said, Dave, they want 30-inch rows. You done planting? Well, he just got done cleaning the planter out. But he said, I don't have a no-till planter. And I said, well, you got row cleaners? Yeah, I got row cleaners. I got spike closing wheels. I got drag chains. I said, well, bring it over. And most we'll have to do is maybe tighten up your tension spring. And of course, the first pass, he went down, then we had a walkway raised up, went over that, and then he planted the rest of the way. And I'm looking down there, and oh yeah, he's off the tractor. Oh, he's behind the tractor. Oh crap! I suppose we got to tighten up them tension springs. So I hiked down there 100 yards, talking to him, and I said, "Well, what's the matter? We got to tighten them springs up." No, he said, "I'm just checking depth," and he said, "We got good spacing and close it up and everything. I wonder why I'm strip tilling for beans." And I said, "Well, I don't know. It looks like it's doing a good job." And the next year I drove by an 80 that's west of me and I couldn't tell if it was planted or not. So I called him up. Oh yeah, I got done 3, 4 days ago. I said, well, I didn't see no strip. No, he said last year we tried it half with stripping and half without. And he said the yield monitor said there wasn't different. And he said, I've got a cabin up north. The heck with strip town then for bean ground. I'm just going up there going fishing for that week. And to this day, he's still planting with that same 7,200 planter. No tilling beans into his corn ground. So, it's, yeah, the down pressure, hydraulic down pressure, all that stuff is great, but do we really need it? He's a good example. Um, why spend money when you don't have to? And his beans look just as good as anybody else's. So,
And that's one thing as your tilth and your soil health improves. I mean, 10 years ago, there was downforce was the big thing. And as your soil improves, you actually uh, end up lifting that row unit a little bit more, just because you don't need quite all that downforce in the as it improves and gets better.
and I will say that too. I mean, and it goes back to 3 years. I mean, that's one of the reasons NRCS makes you do it for 3 years on the same field, so you actually see it. And what I see happening, since I sell seed, is guys will have this 3 year or 5 year commitment and they'll do it. And pretty soon that runs out. Well, they can't get it again, but they don't quit the cover crops. They get, after they once do it for 3 years, they discover the advantages and what it's doing for them. And, they just keep on doing it or even add acres. Now, granted, there's some guys that they'll plant cover crops as long as they get paid. If they don't get paid, they're not going to spend the money. But again, I've got a neighbor here. In fact, it just happened, I think, the last year, or the year before. He told me he had 550 acres of beans, had a good stand of cover crop. He went and no-tilled his beans in 15-inch rows, killed his cover crop. He said, I only had to go back and spray 50 acres the second time. He said, do you know how much that saved me on herbicide? And I said, well, you did spend the money on the cover crop. Yeah, but heck of a lot less than what I spent on herbicides otherwise. So again, you can use these covers to manage moisture and manage weeds.
Well, and there's also benefits from that cover crop root system breaking down. I mean, there's fertility that's there that's available for that cash crop. Not to mention, it also expands the area of soil that cash crop root can actually explore. So, but yeah, if we could try and open this up for questions again and see if there's any questions on cover crops and see where that takes us.
Well, I know personally myself, I'm going to be trying this fall. We're actually and actually Grant Brickowitz is the one who told me that. Um, we've been fighting, I think, this allelopathic effect with the rye, and I think we're going to cut back probably on the cereal rye and throw triticale with it and see if that makes a difference for our interseeding also. Of course, triticale is a little more expensive than cereal rye, but it's still a good root system, got other traits. And I've had other people say, well, then we'll plant sometimes some old winter wheat we had and stuff. We don't have that trouble. So I don't know everything either. I'm still learning and I learn from everyone else.
I'll tell you why I like that too, Jerry, is that's just another diversity in your system, right? That's going to bring a different type of biology and expand the varieties of biology into your soil. So all of that is a good thing.
And I'll agree with that. I mean, yeah, we're interseeding annual rye, turnips, radishes, rape, buckwheat, flax, and I think we can maybe get a pound of crimson clover in there in the early seeding in corn. But that's why I've been coming back with 35 pounds over top with the airplane in the fall. And so that I've got that cereal rye in the spring for my weed control. Now, whether I do that with triticale, maybe less cereal rye, that's something I'm going to be trying this year too. So, and it costs me an extra trip. I mean, yeah, I'm seeding it early, but that's part of my herbicide program. Then I'm coming back and adding that because, to be honest with you, in Minnesota, if you can get 50% of what you seeded of annual rye to come back in the spring, you're doing pretty darn good. In some years, it's not even that. But annual rye has a bigger root system than cereal rye, to be honest with you. So cereal rye, what you see above ground, you have up to 2 times that below ground. Annual rye is 2.5 times. So, and I know our agronomists, which I hired an independent agronomist, they don't sell fertilizer and they don't sell herbicide. The only thing they sell is agronomic services and crop insurance. And he told me last year, he called me about 6 o'clock at night, and I said, "What's the matter now?" "Well, I'm giving you a compliment." And I said, "Well, what's the compliment?" "Well," he said, "we hired another new guy." And he said, when the new guys start on the agronomy team, first thing they learn is how to soil sample. That's their first year. They got to do soil sampling. And he said, "I had him go out and sample your farms today." And I says, "Oh, really?" "Oh, that's good, and everything. So what's wrong?" "Well, nothing." But he came back in. It was about 5:30. He was kind of late and said, "Well, how's it going?" Well, he said, "I can't figure out what's going on. I did Ackermann's farms today." And he said, "I can go out there and push that probe in. I don't even have to step on it. Pull it up, tap it on the pail, and it all falls up. All these other places I've been sampling, I got to take a screwdriver along because it's glued in the dang probe and I can't get it out." So he said, "What you're doing is making a difference." And that's always good to hear when you hear them compliments like that.
Got a quick question here from the chat. Is anybody having success with camelina as a cover crop with or without cereal rye?
Yes and no. I've got two customers actually who are throwing it in where they're spreading it on their bean ground. Now it's a little tough depending because camelina is so small. Depending upon what you're mixing it with, it doesn't stay mixed. So you may end up kind of a spotty. But the one thing that happened is he hires his spraying done from a neighbor that kind of exchanged work. And neighbor sprayed it, but whatever he sprayed didn't kill the camelina. So he had to come back with something else. But he said, when I harvested that field in the fall, and he just did it on one field, he said, my corn yield was 12 bushel an acre more. He said, I don't know. So now this year he's spreading more camelina into his mix that he's doing. It's not cheap. I mean, it's kind of expensive per pound compared to the other covers, but you get 550,000 seeds per pound. So it's kind of like trying to hold water in your hand. So I am hearing some on it, and I've thrown it in my mix a couple places here or there. Um, kind of hit and miss on surface seeding. I would think if you were drilling it would be better. And I know I don't drill mine. I am a firm believer of getting it on early. We fly it on our beans and we get about 20% yellow leaves. In the corn, I tell people to go out there and look at your feet. Are you getting some sunlight down there? There's some leaves below the ears, turning brown. If it is, go ahead and get her seeded. And the reason I say that is I run into falls where it's wet, where we've got an every acre combine. We're driving our semis out of the field, and the neighbor's got 2 acres here, a low spot there with 2 foot deep combine tire tracks where they had to back out, and they're going to have to wait for it to either dry up or freeze up to get their crop out.
Jerry, I'd like to thank you for sharing. Is there any more questions from the crowd?
Probably got time for one more if anybody has a burning question.
Well, I hope I touched on enough things for somebody to pick up something along the way, and I'm always open if people want to call me, just give me a call and I'll be glad to visit with them about it.
Yeah, it's always nice to hear from you, Jerry. I think in the interest of time, we're at our 1:30 cutoff. I'd like to thank everybody for joining. I think this was a good discussion. I'd like to invite everybody back July 3rd at 1:30 or at 12:30 for our next cover crop chat. So if you can join us, that'd be great. And with that, we'll sign off. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.